Welcome OEWD staff to this training video, which is the internal invoice review process for Total Grant Solution. For a little bit of context, my name's Chris and I'm the former director of the contract management group. So when we get into the live system demo, after I have a few slides here to share with you, there are some things that I'll show you that are going to be preferences. So for example, I'll show you some tips and tricks that I learned while I was reviewing invoices that made things a little bit faster for me. You may find, though, that there are other things that will be faster for you. So we'll identify those areas as we go through so that you know kind of what are the things that you must do versus what are some optional areas that you have to look at or optional functions in the system. So let's go ahead and get this kicked off. You will also find that there's a lot of text on some of these slides. My apologies for that. You may want to go ahead and view this video, at least the beginning part, then in a full screen version versus a smaller window. So let's start with some roles and responsibilities. So there are a lot of folks who look at invoices for the department, and generally each of those different layers of review are looking for different things. So your grant coordinators, who are the folks that work on the contract management team within the finance and administration division, they're really your first line of defense. They are reviewing the invoice to make sure that everything is fully supported, all the charges are within the negotiated budget, everything is related to scope, everything is allowable by fund source. They're really your compliance folks. Then secondarily, most of our invoices are also reviewed by either a program officer, program manager, project manager, depending on your title. Those are the program teams. And generally those folks are looking to confirm that the charges are related to scope, generally focusing on personnel and client costs. Not all invoices, not all projects go through this step. And then finally, there's a signatory or senior manager review. And this level is the final confirmation that the invoice is payable. The department head has delegated authority to specific folks within the department to be signatories on their behalf. So not anyone can sign off on a final invoice before it gets paid. There are a select number of folks that have that authority. Grant budgets are built in a couple of different ways. Generally, they are cost reimbursement. However, you may have negotiated deliverables within your grant budget. Examples of deliverables would be things that, until they are completed, the grantee isn't paid. These may be things like required reports. They may be things like specific papers, outcomes that you've negotiated, or things like that. They may be within the budget, so they may be tied to the budget and worth a specific amount, or they may just be restrictions in the scope itself. So things to note about cost reimbursement versus deliverable. If you've built a deliverable in the budget, the sign-off date on that deliverable, so the date that your program manager, project manager, or program officer, or whoever is designated in the scope as the sign-off person for that item, the date that they confirm that the deliverable, the item, was given to the city and that it was to the specifications that the city required, that date then becomes the payable date for that item. Whereas with cost reimbursement, we know exactly when items were purchased because there are invoices, there are dates to be able to track that. Why is this important? This is important because all costs that the city reimburses for must be incurred within the term of the grant. So make sure when you're negotiating your budgets and you're setting up your scopes and you're working with the contract management team to set a beginning and an end date for your grant agreements or your contract agreements, that everything that you're requesting, everything that you're approving, falls within the start date and the end date of that grant or that contract term. Here's an overview of the process that we're going to look at in TGS. So at the top here essentially are two optional steps. If your grantee has a deliverable that they're ready to bill for, they need to do this before they even go into the system. So what they will do is they will submit their deliverable to their program officer, program manager, project manager via email or some other step, however you want it done. And then as a program manager, program officer, you need to then give the grantee written confirmation that that deliverable has been received and that it is acceptable to the city. Again, that then makes that item payable. So then once that's happened, or maybe the grantee doesn't have any deliverables that they need to get pre-approval on, they will then go into the system, they'll navigate to the 7C squared module, and they'll enter their invoice request. The first thing that will happen is once they submit that invoice through the system then, the grant coordinator will log into TGS, navigate to Axiom, which is the internal module where we're going to review things, and take a look for all those compliance issues. So again, they're going to make sure that all the charges on the invoice have backup documentation, everything looks correct. They'll take a pass at cost allocation. So if things look a little odd there, they may ask some questions of the agency. They're going to finish that compliance review, and then they'll go ahead and pass that invoice through the system on to project manager, program officer. Now again, not all invoices, not all programs have this interim step here where the PM or the PO reviews, but for those that do, what you'll see is you'll see within TGS, you'll see that invoice now pass into that person's queue. Once that person has reviewed it, or if the agreed to time frame for which they have to review it passes, and they haven't reviewed it, the invoice then will move into the queue for the signatory or the senior manager to review and approve or reject. So essentially, you always have the GC that reviews, you always have a signatory that reviews and approves prior to payment, and then that orange box, that PMPO, may or may not, that step may or may not be appropriate based on program, based on invoice. Once the signatory, the senior manager, approves an invoice, then the grant coordinator will log back into TGS, provide a copy of that fully approved invoice to the finance team to pay. The finance team then will execute that invoice in the city's accounting system. Transactions are batched daily, and once those transactions are batched, then your grantee will receive payment, either in the way of an ACH or a direct deposit, which is how most are done, or there may be a few that receive paper checks. Some of these steps here at the end may have automation options in the future, and so we'll continue to look into those, but for right now, a lot of this is manual data entry that's done from system to system. A couple of resources that you want to take a look at. So within TGS, there's an area called Report Builder. Within the canned reports, you can pull the monthly program and cost report. I will go ahead and show you how to do this when we're in the live system demo. This is generally where I start when I review invoices. I go ahead and pull that cost report. I print it out so that I can be writing notes on it while I'm looking at the system details on the screen at the same time. You may have two monitors and leave everything on the screen. You may like split screens. It doesn't really matter. That's one of those preference things. But this report here, what it'll do is it'll give you an overview of the invoice by line item and by fund source. So it's a great one to use as you're looking at your supporting documents that folks have uploaded. Another resource that's available in Report Builder are the agency documents. So Again, I will show you as you're reviewing an invoice while it's in your queue how to look at those documents. But then later on, if you decide you want to look back at those documents, those are always archived in Report Builder in the agency documents screen. So you can always get back to those even if the invoice is not in your queue, or maybe you've even rejected it back to the agency to fix something. Okay, so that's it for the overview. Let's go ahead and hop into the system itself and take a look at how to review invoices. So here we are at Total Grant Solution. I'm just in a regular web browser. I've chosen Chrome for mine. I'm going to go ahead and sign into the system as a grant coordinator here on the front page. And the first page that it drops me into is a desktop of sorts. So it'll show me some of the tasks that are waiting for me down here. At the top here is also then all the different modules that I have access to. Now you will see all the different modules up here as you try and log into them. If you don't have access, it will let you know. For example, Hatch is the administrative module. So as a grant coordinator, I don't have access to it, but it will show in my menu. If I try and go into it, it'll remind me that I don't have access. So where you want to focus is either a grant coordinator or a signatory or a program manager is Axiom. That's the internal side of our systems. Where agencies go to file their invoice, the external portal side is 7C Squared. The other place that you'll find very helpful is Report Builder. There's a whole nother video on how to run different queries in Report Builder, but I'm actually going to start here first. This is one of those tips and tricks that I alluded to in the PowerPoint presentation. I start with Report Builder. I pull the canned report for the month that I'm going to look at, and then generally I'll print that and I'll have that sitting on my desk so that as I'm looking at the support documents on screen, I can actually look at the invoice at the same time. You may find that you want to do this as a split screen option though. So let's go there first. We're going to go to Report Builder. We're going to click Go. And then within the canned reports here, I'm going to choose the monthly program and cost report. It's the only one that actually runs with information for OEWD. The system was built to handle all sorts of program information, client information, as well as financial information. But right now, OEWD only uses TGS for financial information. I say that just to give you context that there are custom reports and there are additional canned reports that you'll see as options, but they won't actually pull data because they were built for other municipalities. And then here is where I'm going to choose my agency that I want to look at. If I was logged in as an ED, I would only see my own agency here, but this is actually where I'm going to go ahead and say, okay, what invoice do I want to look at? So I know that the one that I want to review, the test one that I have in here, is for actually OEWD. So let me go ahead and find them as an agency here. And it's under the Workforce Division. That's the sample agency that we have set up. Select a contract. So I can look at, they have two different programs that we've set up in here. Again, you're going to know because you're going to know what's in your queue. You're going to know which one of these that you want to pull. What we're going to take a look at today is the invoice submitted against Contract 1513. So I'm going to go ahead and choose that. And again, because it's in your queue, you're going to know which month you want to look at. But because I created this as a sample, I already know. So the invoice that I want to look at for Project 1513 is actually a July invoice for 2017. If I try to pull up a month where an invoice doesn't exist, it'll still generate a report. The report just will have all zeros in it. So I want to look at the invoice from month July 2017. I can then choose any date within July. I always just choose the last date of July. And then I'm going to click the Show Report button, or the little arrow here to the right. Then what the system's going to do is it's going to generate for me the monthly program and cost report. And I can see here when it was submitted, who it was submitted by, so this is your agency information. And then as this passes through the different levels of approval, so again, the GC approval, potentially a program manager approval, and then definitely a signatory approval, you'll see additional lines print here. And it'll have the date and who approved it. But you can see this one doesn't have any approvals yet. It's still sitting in that first grant coordinator queue for review, which is what I'm going to demonstrate right now. So again, I would generally print this, because what I'm going to do now is I'm going to compare the documents that have been uploaded against what they're requesting for payment here, and ensure that I have everything that I need in order to support this request. So everything is auditable, everything is dated correctly, everything is within the term of the grant agreement, within the term of the scope, is correctly assigned to the line item. So for example, when I look at the document that's uploaded here against rent, I'm going to make sure that that is actually a rent document, and that it's not something else. The system will only allow our agencies to bill against line items that have been built for them. And the line items are built based on the budget that is negotiated in either the grant agreement or the contract agreement. So if an agency needs to do a budget modification, they need to do that with their grant coordinator and their program manager's approval. And then what will happen is the grant coordinator will go in and rebuild the project for the remaining balance of it, so that the agency then has the ability to bill against, potentially new line items. Why that's important is that one of the things that I'm going to check, like I said, is that this charge here is actually for rent. What you don't want to let agencies do is charge for things like, personnel under rent or something like that. You want to make sure that the budget is correct, the charges are correct per budget line item, and if a modification is necessary, then what I would do is I would have to reject that invoice, because I'm not going to approve a rental charge that's not a rental charge, obviously. We would do a budget modification, adjust the budget in the system, and then have the agency resubmit their invoice that is then correct. Why that's really important is because we want to be able to pull reports across portfolios and know exactly what's being spent by budget line item, by fund source, by agency. So we want to make sure that when we're doing this review, we're not approving things that are either in the wrong place or they are not allowable. Okay, so that's how I found my program and cost report. Again, I would go ahead and print this out and have it to the side for me. I'm going to go ahead and close this. That would be the only thing that I would do in Report Builder to begin with. Again, if you want to know more about Report Builder, please take a look at that other video. Then I'm going to go into Axiom. Axiom, as I said, is essentially the internal portal for TGS, for OEWD, whereas 7C Squared is the external portal. So you can see here that I have some projects that are assigned to me. Again, I'm logged in as a grant coordinator, and I can see that my role here is GC. You may have multiple logins and multiple roles depending on what functions you play in the system. And then here in the middle is my desktop, or essentially all the tasks that are waiting for me. So this is how I know what's in my queue. I will generally get emails as soon as any of these pop in. So if you are the first line of defense, you are the grant coordinator on the on that project, that specific project, you will generally get an email every time an invoice is submitted. And that will then trigger you to come in here and look. Okay. I can either navigate by using the search box up here, or I can navigate by just clicking on any of these tasks that are waiting for me down here. If I'm not sure what to put into the search box, I can search by agency. Maybe I know that Mission Hiring Hall has a project I want to look at. I can just start typing their name and it'll give me suggestions. The other option that you have is if you click on these three gears here, it says click for instructions. That'll do is that'll pop up another screen for you here that also gives you an idea of different things that you can look for. So different screens that may not be obvious ones. As a grant coordinator, generally these aren't going to be ones that you're going to use. You see there are only a few GC roles over here. But as a manager in the contract management department, you may need these additional screens. Okay, so again, if I'm doing invoice review, it's going to be here in my queue for me. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on it and take a look at it. So what did I promise I wanted to look at? I promised that I wanted to look at the payment for contract 1513 for July 2017. So I'm going to go ahead and click on it. And the system will send me straight into the payment approval screen. If I had multiple invoices that had been submitted for that project that were awaiting my review, I'd see them here in this monthly drop-down. Generally, you want to approve invoices in the order of reporting period. So, for example, if I had July, August, and September, maybe had all been submitted at once, and I saw them all here, I would review July 1st, then August, then September. It helps keep balances in line a little bit closer because the system does calculate balances for agencies as they're submitting their invoices in the 7C Squared portal. Not a big deal though. You can always review and approve out of order. You can also reject things out of order. So let's go ahead and take a look at this one. So again, you know, if we were using executive summaries and things like that, you might see a little bit more information here, but we're not. And then here, it's going to show you only the line items that they've charged. So this is not their entire budget for the program, but when I pulled out that program and cost report from Report Builder, this is the only item that they're asking for reimbursement for this month. So that's why it's the only thing that you're going to see in this screen. I want to go ahead and see if they've uploaded any invoices or any support documents, essentially, for this line item. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on invoices here to the left, and then I'm going to select this drop down and see what's in here. Okay. If I had more than one line item that was charged here, clicking on invoices to the left of the line item resets this drop down. Okay, so if I need to review rent, for example, I'd click on invoices, I'd pull up this document, take a look at it, see if it's acceptable or not, and then I'd go on to salaries. I'd have a salaries line item here, I'd click the invoices to the left of salaries, and then I'd have a different set of documents. Okay, so again, I've clicked invoices, and now I can see what documents were uploaded for this specific line item. I just go ahead and select the document there, and it will launch in a separate window so that I can see it. Again, I've staged this as a sample, so there's really nothing other than a PDF doc that says placeholder that's attached to it right now. But generally what I would see here, because this is a rent charge, is I would either see a check showing that they've paid rent. I might see the lease agreement with the rent details in it that show me how much per month they are required to pay. I might see all sorts of different types of documents. That's what I'm looking for here. I'm looking to, again, support the charge that's being made and support that the charge exists within the term of the grant agreement in order for it to be paid for. Once I've gone through and reviewed all my supporting documents, if they're all appropriate and everything looks good, then what I would do is I go ahead and change this payment status to approved. Leave some notes down here. Go ahead and check the box and click submit. And then what that'll do is that'll then move this invoice into the next appropriate queue. Each project and each contract is set up with a certain approval path. So as I had said in the beginning, maybe not all contracts, invoices, projects get reviewed by a program officer in the middle. Maybe just some of them do. That setup is all done by the grant coordinators as they create these projects in TGS. So once you either approve or reject in here, it'll move out of your queue into the next appropriate one. If I had gone through and I found some things that maybe weren't supported, maybe some line items are missing backup documentation, that's when I would go ahead and set this to not approved. Okay? And again, it asks me to confirm down here and shows me that the status of not approved is being assigned. Asks me also to leave some notes so that when the agencies go into 7C squared to unlock and to make that correction and then resubmit, they know what they need to do. It doesn't give you very much space to type in though. So I would encourage you to not leave all of the explanation in the system, but to also follow up with an email to your agency and to your contacts at that agency with specifically what it is that they need to adjust in the system in order to allow that invoice to then be approved. So if it is, hey, you're missing documentation for salary for your executive director, go ahead and put that in an email. When you set this to not approved and essentially reject the invoice, the system does send an automated email back to the agency to let them know. It will only go to the organizational administrators at that agency though. So you may need to follow up with your specific billing person if they've not been given an org admin approval level. Okay, so some of our agencies are large enough that the accountants that you're working with may only have a data entry level permission for the system because that's what their executive director has determined is appropriate. Agency profiles and roles are assigned by agency heads. So OEWD determines internal staff's roles and assignments, whereas for all of our grantees, their organizational administrators determine the roles for their own staff and are in charge of activating, deactivating, or adjusting those roles as appropriate. Okay. Other things that are available over here on the right, there are a bunch of other screens. So if you wanted to actually dig into other work plans and services that maybe this agency has, maybe you want to look at an overview of all of their different programs, you could find that in there. Maybe you want to find a little bit more information about this project and all the invoices that have been approved up until this point. You could find that in Project Lifetime. Maybe your agency has called you and they can't find their password and they need it sent to them again. They can do that either on the main screen of TGS. There's a I forgot my password link there. Or there's also user assistance here where you can open it up and you can't see their passwords, but it does allow you to email it to them. So there's an email link for all the staff that are set up for that agency in that screen. So those are some other areas that may be helpful in here. All right, so once I've completed my payment review and approval, so I've either assigned it as approved or not approved. I've clicked my confirmation box. I've filled out all my communication and I've hit submit. Oops. Then what will happen is it will clear out of my queue. So it'll just kind of go back to a sample or dummy screen. And if I go back home, then I'll see that that one is there's no longer a 1513 here in my queue to look at. That invoice is now moved on to the next person that needs to review it. Okay, that is all there is to it. Very easy to find your invoices here from your Axiom inbox. Click straight on them to drive straight into that payment approval screen. And then again from your payment approval screen, then you can review all the backup documents that have been uploaded right here by clicking on invoices first, then choosing them from the menu. And then once you're confident that you've reviewed the entire invoice, you set the status for, again, that entire invoice to either approved or not approved. Approved pushes it to the next person's queue. Not approved will send it back to the agency for review and corrections.